And listen, man, I'm not a Trump supporter, never have.
Mic check 1 2. Oh, yep, there we go.
Been, never will be. But I gotta admit, this motherfucker is somewhat charismatic. Oh, bitch, shut up, we know. Listen, bitch, I know you're a fucking Trump supporter because you won't shut the fuck up. But if you don't shut the fuck up, I'm gonna put my in your mouth. Fuck me, I wish you would. That way I got a reason to get rid of this last $2 in my wallet. I bet you your pussy tastes like cold french fries. You don't want to fuck with me? I'm like Denzel in Training Day. I'm surgical with this bitch.
At a comedy show, Aries Spears went.
And listen, man, I'm not a Trump supporter, never have been, never will be. But I gotta admit, this motherfucker is somewhat charismatic. Oh, bitch, shut up, we know. Listen, bitch, I know you're a fucking Trump supporter because you won't shut the fuck up. But if you don't shut the fuck up, I'm gonna put my in your mouth. Fuck me, I wish you would. That way I got a reason to get rid of this last $2 in my wallet.
Alright, mic check, yep, sweet. Now if I play the video, you can hear it. Alright, I'm still having problems with my one.
At a comedy show,
Because... Why was the audio running through here earlier? TV. I can't believe how much of it stuff I had to pull apart just to like sort of make certain things work. Mic check. But it's good, it's just showing me what sort of overlays I need set up and what equipment I need and everything. Anyway, just gonna put something on and just chill and watch something. And try and keep it transformative and just sort of talk and try and pull something up on the other screen, and might sort of put another overlay on for my second screen so I can just sort of go over some stuff that's in videos and whatnot. Don't know if I'll do that right now. For now I'm just going to sort of sit back and chill and hit play on a couple of videos. I thought they stopped giving you the ability to link, but it's just premium, I guess, only. Settings. There's a link. Where's the link on the browser? Or is it still something you can't do? What the hell? Purchases and membership, Cosdiff. Manage membership. Ah, someone gifted me a membership for. Oh, bro. I didn't realize he'd done that. I bet he gifted me that because I hassled frickin' Stanimus for him. And he just gifted me a membership. And he gifted it with just his homie. That's so nice. I've got to fucking say something to him. Costa sent me a gift membership with a personal name on it and I didn't even notice. I'm a dick. My only fucking favourite YouTube actually responded. I didn't notice. He just ended though. I don't think it's actually from Costa too, that's crazy. Alright, settings. Advanced settings. Okay, how do I link? I just want to watch stuff, but I don't want to be up, down, up, down. Alright, bum, bum, bum. No. What if I do it from my phone? No, because I'm not playing the audio through. I can just pull my laptop forward. Oh no, because it's on the second monitor now. I need that keyboard. All I really need is a mouse, which I've got. I'm just scrolling through YouTube, not really searching for anything in particular. Mouse here next to me. Or at least the Xbox controller. Switch between them. Definitely got to play around with this whole setup. It's a bit awkward now. Now that I've had to rip all the cables apart 3 times. Alright. Let's what happened to that video that was about to play? Oh yeah, I went through the settings. Probably shouldn't be showing all this on the screen. Maybe not everything at least.
And listen, man, I'm not a Trump supporter, never have been, never will be. But I gotta admit, this motherfucker is somewhat charismatic. Oh, shut up, we know. Listen, bitch, I know you're a fucking Trump supporter because you won't shut the fuck up. But if you don't shut the fuck up, I'm gonna put my in your mouth. Fuck me, I wish you would. That way I got a reason to get rid of this last $2 in my wallet.
There's the video, so screen share, we'll just set back to that page.
Why is she saying no? Better yet, why even say anything at this point?
You all in your feelings over Trump, and this is a fucking comedy show. Where the fuck is Bill Cosby when you need him? I can see about a puss on your face. You're taking this shit serious. Just laugh, motherfucker. No, chill. Let him be. I got this. motherfucker love me, but they ain't acting like you. I gotta tell you something. And listen, here's the beauty of an American democracy. Whether you like the man or not, you all have the right to vote for whoever the fuck you want to vote for. So you did your thing. But I gotta hand it to you, man. You guys' level of loyalty towards Trump is breathtaking. It doesn't matter how dangerous his actions or how irresponsible his words. Y'all stand behind that motherfucker no matter what. You guys are like battered wives. As long as he comes home with a box of chocolates and an apology, you'll stay. I get you.
She really thought she did something here. Now, Aries, as we know, not one to play with.
I don't know how this is gonna play out.
We're gonna make America great.
Huh?
We're still making America great.
Shut up, you are outnumbered. That couldn't wait to say that. You could have said that 10 minutes ago. She finally couldn't take it. You can't tell white people not to express themselves. That had enough of this. He's making America great! I will with a MAGA hat on. You be confused as a mother. I'll give you some good racist black. On the back talking like Obama. Now I'm gonna make this look.
Good.
I'm gonna love you like I love my daughter, Sasha Malone.
This is good.
She couldn't take it, man. What's your name, sweetie? Kathy. Who you with, Kathy? Is your husband? Yeah, y'all should leave now. Cause there's about 30 in here that's gonna beat you to your car.
You the one that don't realize where you're at.
My people didn't realize where we were at when we were on that boat. So give us that back too, mother. He really thought he said some just now.
I did.
No, you didn't, mother.
I did.
Did you hear the audience laugh when you said what you said? It does matter. And you
Know where you at?
What does it
you
sound like when I
screaming
talk?
don't make you right, sucker. I can feel that
Yeah,
white
sounds
rage
alright.
coming through. You know where you at now? Out of here. Hey, 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 hey. Let's smoke a peace pipe. Let's make some peace. I got it, baby. Felt like a Klan rally. Get out!
He also has a take on this guy.
Thank you so much for being here with us. Tell me a little bit about why you guys decided to come to the courthouse here in Miami.
We came here to defend Trump like the immortals defended King Cyrus. And they had the mask on that was made of brass with them thick noses and thick lips. They were black men. And that's for the purpose of showing that Trump is not a colonizing racist.
And his group Blacks for Trump.
Disgusts me. I see a lot of my people doing right now. Black men for Trump.
There's a lot of that.
What's wrong with you?
You said
Some of y'all be so comfortable on a plantation.
You said it seems like all the black men on the right got their tap shoes on.
Yeah.
Tweak the sound volume.
It's jazz hands time. Oh. Listen, I don't say what you will, and I don't want to get too deep politically, but I'll just say that white folks have had a history in this country of supporting their own
check
no
one, two.
matter what.
I might need to
So
change the
I just don't see why black people, we can't have that same ability to support our own, no matter what. And all this about she's locked up more black men and weed and all that, that's been debunked.
Yeah, it's not true.
That's not true.
Yeah.
And I know there are a lot of black women who do, but I would
Mic
think
check,
that as
one,
a
two.
black woman, how great of a statement would it be to have a woman
Mic check,
president?
1, 2.
So one, you break that glass ceiling, but then it's a black woman on top of that.
Yeah.
So you accomplish two powerful statements at once. I would like to see that.
I know this is impossible to do, okay? But I want you to put yourself in the mind of a Trump supporter attending a comedy show.
This is so awkward.
And think about
Was it
how
so
many
awkward?
jokes you will hear that really offend you. And you're just sitting there
Put that mouse there.
internally bursting at the seam and trying to hold it together. And then the one time you do,
Let's play with these volumes.
it's because the
Let's turn this
comedian said something
green shit down.
true that is critical of someone for some reason,
Mic
one
check,
way
1, 2.
or another, that you decided to put up on the pedestal of like Zeus, of
Mic
like
check 1, 2.
of like Socrates. And it hurts so bad that you cannot hold it in anymore. So you say something.
Mic check 1, 2.
Which
So
is
does
the
that
golden
sound
rule
more better and
of
even
what
and equal?
you don't do.
I'm just listening
at
to my
a
voice.
show
I'm not
like
actually asking anyone.
And then from there, you
Yeah,
have
it kind of
now
sounds now
given,
like
you have
the video and
broken
me are the
the
similar
comedy
volume.
social contract.
You can listen to the video, still listen
You
to
are
me.
giving the performer, the professional, permission to crush you. That's what gets me about every single time that we
I'm happy
cover
you-
these, is that
Twitch
it
chat's
is
going.
so self-inflicted.
So you can just chat in the Twitch chat.
Every single time, it's so
Test,
self-inflicted,
test.
and they don't see it. And you can tell they don't see it
Yep, sweet.
because
and then
she
you
mouthed
should-
off to Ari Spears,
Let's just go to my
and then when she
channel
walked out,
double check
gave
all
him the
those things
finger.
on there. We can
I
see
don't
everything
get
want.
it.
Yeah, hell yeah.
is it because art is inherently
Plug my
left? Is it because art inherently calls out the powerful? And she wants to be powerful? Like, I don't get it. I will never get it. As I've always said, don't do this.
Take me a little bit just to settle down. Good. Gosh, she looks terrifying.
There
What
is
this
no
video possibly
plan
did.
for Venezuela, or I should say that Donald Trump does not actually
put
have
something
a
else on-
plan
gotta put some
for
more overlays on
Venezuela.
then. You gotta play
It
with the
seems
overlays, see
like
what
there's a
overlays
bunch
I
of
can
other
put on.
people who have plans for Venezuela,
Yeah, make
and
sure
that
there's
they
something
seem
else
to
happening
be
on the screen.
not necessarily
this is
all
where,
on the
you know, I
same
can put
page.
my,
There's been
I've got this idea to
reporting,
make
and we
like a-
talked about at least
and
testimony
used by
that
the stats, you know,
was
stats news, shorts, I was gonna make
delivered
short
in
videos, just daily
2019,
short
and
videos,
then
just like used by the stats
ostensibly
people wanna know what are more
some
interesting
reporting
than
from what's
just
been on,
GDP
you know, videos that have been
whatever,
on
just, you know,
Russian Telegram
happiness index,
channels
housing levels,
that
all
Putin
that sort of
had
stuff we should actually
encouraged
know.
Trump to
But I can just
adopt
put that as an
a
overlay on here, I
modern
could
day
work out the stats I wanna
Monroe
put on.
Doctrine, or the Donroe Doctrine, as
I'll
Trump
play
has
with
been
the
talking
overlays,
about.
you know, look
And
at
the idea being that, look, we're in a multipolar world, and you don't have to mess around with
Browser
China, you don't
source,
have to mess
third-party
around with
integration.
Russia. You just essentially create Fortress America. You control and dominate the Western Hemisphere, and you'll have all
so
the
I can put in
resources you
any
need. You'll have shorter supply
source.
lines. All of that sounds all well and good.
And let me do what I would like with
really
Ukraine.
quick
It is my
Google.
territory. You know, why don't we just kind of put all of this aside? We're all in this together, right? We'll carve up the world.
Well,
That's
it's like a mafia.
Yeah.
It's basically like a mafia
It's
deal.
territory.
You know, I've been watching,
Yes.
rewatching a little bit of The Wire. I mean, it's that type of thing. Now,
I was gonna say.
the biggest problem for the
Either way,
execution
we'll
of
leave
that,
those
however,
softwares
is that this is not 1935. This is not 1965. This is not 1895. These countries no longer are so easily dominated by the U.S. in the way that it would have been 50 or 60 years ago, because there's so many weapons there. And so with 10,000 Marines off the coast of Venezuela, the United States is not in a position to invade and take over Venezuela. And it is unclear, it became clear, I think, to Trump, or at least Trump was, you know, there was a lot of neocons who were like, oh, we're going to put in Maria Corina Machado and get rid of the Chavistas, you know, the Hugo
Marxists.
Chavez Marxist folks. And then, you know, she's going to open up. I mean, she literally said 6 months ago, I'm going to give all the oil back to the Americans, essentially. And So I think there were people in the administration. Lindsey Graham reportedly was very encouraging on this coup and kidnapping of Maduro, but I think he thought that Maria Corina Machado would get the nod from Trump, and his neocon fantasies would be carried out. But Trump seems to have basically just stopped, in part because some people suggest that Trump mentioned this today, apparently, or yesterday, that he was going after Maduro because Maduro was mocking him by doing
his dance. And if you can believe that, then you can believe that he would be so spiteful towards Maria Corina Machado that he wouldn't impose her as the leader of Venezuela, because like the practical realities don't stop these people. I mean, they're behaving in a very unhinged manner altogether. We've read in the packet today that the CIA briefed the administration and said that she wouldn't have the infrastructure to take over the government, and that's true. Like, she has been in since the early 2000s in the sphere of right-wing neocons, NGOs here in the West getting these awards, right? I mean, there's a cultural memory in Venezuela where people understand that these are the Yankees trying to steal our resources and imposing their preferred candidate, like they did with Guaido and like they've done across Latin America. And so, like, this hadn't stopped them before. She'd been enormously explicit, but the point is like, the arrogance of the neocons is paramount here. So why didn't they try?
Well, I mean, I think they tried.
Now we know the answer. It could just be Trump's pettiness.
Well, and we should also say too, and later in the program, we will dig into sort of the theory that perhaps this was just one of the biggest winners was this billionaire hedge fund guy, Paul Singer, who essentially bought the U.S. Portion of Chevron, which was the Venezuelan oil company, and bought it for 50 cents, 30 cents on the dollar. And this is a way to make him, Citco, excuse me. Very, very wealthy. And but before we get there, here we have Sean Hannity. And Sean Hannity has always been essentially a Republican operative. He had a very good relationship with Donald Trump because he kisses people's asses, and he was basically a main advisor to Trump in his first term, probably still the case. But everybody's afraid of Trump. They don't want they want to convince him the way that Trump comes to it himself. And it's quite clear that all these neocons, I'm talking like Lindsey Graham and whoever other neocons who are sort of interested in the notion of getting rid of the Marxists in this area and maintaining our hegemony insofar as we have an open policy for U.S. corporations there, got into Hannity's ear and we're like, dude, you're the only one who can save this now. We need Maria Corina Machado to get the nod from Trump. You got to do your magic, and watch how like desperate Hannity is in there to like.
Not the only desperate person in this clip. I mean, this is humiliating on so many different levels.
Watch this.
And it's not very usual that people will dedicate the Nobel Peace Prize to the leader of a different country and say publicly, he deserves this more than I do. But you did that.
Let me be very clear. As soon as I learned that we had been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, I dedicated to President Trump because I believed at that point that he deserved it. And a lot of people, most people said it was impossible to achieve what he has just done on Saturday, January 3rd. So if I believed he deserved it on October, imagine now. I think he has proven to the world what he means. I mean, January 3rd will go down in history as the day justice defeated a tyranny. It's a milestone, and it's not only huge for the Venezuelan people and our future, I think it's a huge step for humanity, for freedom and human dignity.
Have you spoken with President Trump since then?
I spoke with President Trump on October 10th, the same day the prize was announced. Not since then, but I do want to say today.
That's I spoke. I mean, 2 or 3 months ago. But
I haven't spoken to him since I got the prize that was rightfully should have gone to him.
But
how did that conversation go?
Here's the coup de grace. Let's see if she's ready.
President Trump since then.
I spoke with President Trump on October 10th, the same day the prize was announced. Not since then, but I do want to say today, on behalf of the Venezuelan people, how grateful we are for his courageous vision, historical actions he has taken against this narco-terrorist regime to start dismantling this structure and bringing Maduro to justice, which means that 30 million Venezuelans are now closer to freedom, but also that the United States of America is a safer country nowadays.
Right. Did you at any point offer to give him the Nobel Peace Prize? Did that actually happen? I had read that somewhere. I wasn't sure if it was true.
Well, it hasn't happened yet, but I certainly would love to be able to personally tell him that we believe the Venezuelan people, because this is a prize of the Venezuelan people, certainly want to give it to him and share it with him. What he has done, as I said, is historic.
Oh my God! That is
words. Where's my gold?
You know. The problem is, she's like maybe a 5, and I don't know. She's just like out of my age range.
Yes, well, there you go.
You know, so
she's aged out.
She's aged out.
Like maybe if it was the 80s.
If maybe I had gotten it before, but you know, when you have to actually kidnap a leader of another country to get your peace prize, it doesn't feel as good. I'm sorry, I just don't want to have to. Makes it feel like I'm being too
The problem is
thirsty.
she lacks what Zoran had in the Oval Office, which is like an aura of being a winner.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry.
Right.
She should have given it to him October 10th. You had your opportunity. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. Even take phone calls. You should check it out.
Even move it over a little bit. Oh, it's already moved over too far. There we go. Spin it out as big as we can.
We should check in with Chuck Schumer, who is the opposition leader.
Can I tell a quick story about it? Because I saw him at the inauguration, and it was amazing. I was using my phone to zoom in on his face to see how he was reacting. And when just seeing him in the background of AOC's speech, I'm like, look into your future, dude. Like, he wasn't clapping. The whole front row was Bernie and Jane Sanders smiling, AOC smiling, even Kathy Hochul's on board. And Chuck's just sitting there, like, completely looking like, you know, his career is passing him by. And that should be the case, you know?
And here he is. Of course, we have now. He was not Senate leader during Iraq, but he certainly was in the Senate during that time. And here he is watching the President of the United States engage in an illegal invasion, I guess, not necessarily occupation, but certainly an illegal invasion of a country to kidnap the leader of that country, regardless of whether you think, whether he is legit or not. Still, national sovereignty is unclear. Was just I believe it's blistering. Well, it's safety goggles.
And we have the War Powers Act, which you mentioned.
Right.
I have the right to that on the floor. Kane is this woman. If there was ever I missed this time, and they don't feel.
Alright, no. Whoops. I accidentally hit enter with my vape pen when I dropped it. Why does this look weird? Alright, here we go. We'll watch. Let's watch some Keith Edwards. It's always good. Oh, and then we should go judge Asmongold for being the idiot that he is. We'll see what old Keith's got to say first.
You know, thank God for Governor Gavin Newsom, who is willing to go there when so many are not. And boy, did he go there. I was directed to a tweet by Gavin Newsom earlier today where he outed a major figure in MAGA. And good. We need to start throwing stones. When they go low, baby, we need to go to hell. And we need to take them there with us. Now, let's just real quick check in on CBS News, led by Barry Weiss and Donald Trump's billionaire buddy, shall we? Let's just see how it's going over there.
Atmosphere. With Maduro now out, that base of power and influence could be out too. All right, to other news, as you just heard from Jill. Well, to other news now, to Governor Walz. No, we're going to do Mark Kelly. First day, big problems here. Are we going to Kelly here, or are we going to go into Jonah Kaplan?
It's only $9 a month or something. Here I have more. 8, I think.
We're doing Mark Kelly, possibly demoted from his retired rank of captain in the Navy. Hegseth issued what's known as a letter of censure for the Arizona Democrat over his participation in a video that called on service members to defy illegal orders.
Perfect. Isn't it? Perfect.
The second option that
I know that MAGA complained about DEI hires, but truly, this is such a good sign.
And then this other one is
the only people who are getting to position of power. Look, this guy has no business being the Secretary of Defense, a Fox News host. Then you got this stooge
signing up or anything
with good hair. He's got a good head of hair. Getting jobs that they truly have no business having. And they're complaining about DEI. Baby, you're the ones benefiting from DEI. The only reason why you have these jobs is because you're stupid enough to be controlled. Now, Governor Gavin Newsom, all right, so he was responding to Benny Johnson. Have you heard of Benny Johnson? Benny Johnson, propagandist, loves to go to the White House and say whatever it is they want him to say.
I don't know why.
And he said today he didn't want Nick Shirley to get all of the clout, all the attention, because if you don't know, Nick Shirley is a MAGA YouTuber who went to Minnesota to find fraud that doesn't exist. And now Benny Johnson said, no, I must be the YouTuber who uncovers things that aren't there. And he said this fraud investigation announcement. It's actually pretty funny. Next week, our team is traveling to the fraud capital of the world, California. Fraud capital of the world is Mar-a-Lago. The fraud uncovered in Minnesota was very bad and led to the destruction of Tim Walz's career. But Governor Newsom's California is far worse. The American taxpayer needs to see firsthand how criminal California fraud is robbing our nation blind. Here's just a glimpse of what we already know, and then he goes into a bunch of crap. We're building the trip right now. What do you want to see? We need your help and suggestions. Reach out to us directly if you have tips on fraud. So we're going to go investigate fraud. By the way, do you know if there's any fraud? If so, email us. The American taxpayers are pissed over fraud that we don't know exists or not. Email us. We're going to fight for the people who eventually email us. And then there's this AI slop. All right, Governor Newsom responded to this.
And that's why there's so much light in the room.
We'll make sure Grindr servers are ready. Oh, man. Oh, man.
Sometime. Make it just one, but...
Why he's saying that is because literally a month ago,
Sweet.
Milo Yiannopoulos. If I respected him, I'd learn his name, but I don't respect him. But he was on Tim Pool's podcast. God, it's just a cast of clowns, where he alleged that Benny Johnson has sex with young men at Republican conferences. His wife knows about it and she cries about it. Here's what he had to say.
One of the most distinctive things about the right wing in this country is its homosexual overtones. Benny Johnson posts pictures of his children every 2 days. It's weird. And everybody knows what went on with Benny Johnson in those lobbies and in those hotel rooms at SAS. Everybody knows.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Men. Younger.
Whenever George Santos pops up, it's like a jump scare. It's like, what are you doing there, George?
Drop it down.
This might be the gayest video I've ever done.
Underage, at least I don't know that. His wife was crying drunk in the lobby 3 SASs in a row about how her husband was upstairs with boys.
Come on.
Like, go ask her.
That one held quiet.
Come on.
Go ask her.
Come on, Milo.
Go ask her.
Milo, aren't you ever scared of getting sued? You say I'm sitting here like I am humbled by the lore and your ability. Audacity, just I mean, like there's no teapots in this room right now to express how I feel.
George, I have said these things about people for 20 years and never once in my career been sued. I've issued 3 corrections in my entire journalistic career because I get my facts right and people know that they do not want to go through discovery.
Actually, I want to say this.
I've never been sued for anything I've ever said about anyone.
The one thing I need to say this.
Because I'm right.
The most terrifying thing about Milo is that he knows all your secrets.
I know
he knows everybody's lore. Trust me. I am terrified of Milo. I will never cross Milo.
All right. Well, what he said there is actually true. Now, Benny Johnson actually did threaten to sue Milo over those comments. He did threaten to sue. He said this. I am duty bound to take action to protect my family against those who maliciously defame and attack us. More to come on that soon.
Sweet, that sounds good. Stream manager.
I'm a 13-year-old.
Minimize the video.
Pray for healing for this sick individual and delusional people. Jesus is about redemption. The legal system is about justice. Happy Sunday. Now, he posted that on December 7th, 2025. Well, TikTok, bitch. It's January 6th. It's literally been a month. Where's the lawsuit? Milo made a good point. Benny didn't sue. Why didn't Benny sue? Well, I don't know. Maybe because Milo was right. Maybe. Now, that's why it's just so perfect. It is so perfect that Governor Newsom goes there. We need more people to go there. In fact, a TikToker has gone there too, alleging that Mike Johnson's Johnson might have seen other Johnsons. With a pastor? Yes.
Welcome back to the Fascist Housewives of Washington, D.C. Today, we're actually talking about Mikey himself because, plot twist, this time, he's the housewife. And today, we won't be talking about Mikey's obsession with gay people. Well, not exactly. Instead, we're talking about Mikey's home away from home. The $3.7 million townhouse that he's sharing with, not his wife, but a roommate. And not just any roommate, an evangelical pastor. And this story is actually insane, so just stick with me. Let's go back to the roommate, the person living in the house with Mikey Johnson. That would be Steve Berger, evangelical pastor, self-appointed discipler of lawmakers, and apparently now Mikey's new live-in spiritual sponsor. Now, Steve's not just any pastor. He's a Tennessee megachurch guy that once preached that January 6th was overblown, has called the separation of church and state a delusional lie, and has described global institutions as demonic. And now he calls himself a minister to members of Congress. This is currently on his website. And as you would guess, he's a real upstanding guy in other ways, too. He and the owner of the house were both ardent supporters that Donald Trump won the 2020 election and openly called for Congress, and he insisted home he loves and cares about. Oh, Steve, we know. But since the beginning of the year, interviews and videos have shown Mike leaving the house every morning and returning every evening without his wife, Kelly. And one day that Mikey was there, Bergman was also seen there opening the front door barefoot in his pajama bottoms. It's not just Steve and Mike that have been seen living at the house. It's also other members of Congress, including far-right evangelical frat house for the far-right the U.S. presidency, living on to disciple lawmakers and translate biblical principles into policy, all in a house owned by a four-time divorcee wife of Washington, D.C.
I choose to believe what she's saying. I choose to believe it. It makes sense to me. It makes sense to me in the comments.
Oh, it's so too hot.
We have a pretty stunning confession from Donald Trump, but first some background. Yesterday, the New York Times published a pretty shocking piece of reporting that read, quote, Mr. Maduro in late December rejected an ultimatum from President Trump to leave office and go into gilded exile in Turkey, according to several Americans and Venezuelans involved in transition talks. This week, he was back on stage brushing off the latest U.S. escalation, a strike on a dock that the U.S. said was used for drug trafficking, by bouncing to an electronic beat on state television while his recorded voice repeated in English, "No crazy war." Mr. Maduro's regular public dancing and other displays of nonchalance in recent weeks helped persuade some on the Trump team that the Venezuelan president was mocking them and trying to call what he believed to be a bluff, according to two people who spoke on the condition of anonymity. That Maduro's dancing, which Donald Trump felt was an instance of the Venezuelan dictator mocking him, was a justification, adequate justification, to go ahead with the regime change incursion, which, to be clear, would be fucking insane. I'm sorry, but invading a foreign country because its leader mocked your dance moves is like season 6 of Lost level ridiculousness. And if there was a reason, it would be even more insane for Trump to actually acknowledge as much, which is why he said this. Leader had his feelings hurt, and Trump goes on stage and essentially confesses to exactly that. But hey, always important to remember, America is not ready for an emotional woman as president. In fact, Trump's fragile ego is so apparent that the Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, knew that the only way to curry favor with him, even after he dismissed her by saying that she's not respected in her country, was to go on Fox News with Sean Hannity and offer up this pathetic display of servility.
Let me go back and talk about it. You stayed in the country, but you were hiding within your country until you went to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. And I want you to tell us, you never went back at that point. Did you not go back because you feared for your life? And tell us, I mean, it's not very usual that people will dedicate the Nobel Peace Prize to the leader of a different country and say publicly, he deserves this more than I do. But you did that.
Let me be very clear. As soon as I learned that we had been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, I dedicated to President Trump because I believed at that point that he deserved it. And a lot of people, most people said it was impossible to achieve what he has just done on Saturday, January 3rd. So if I believed he deserved it, on October, imagine now. I think he has proven to the world what he means. I mean, January 3rd will go down in history as the day justice defeated a tyranny. It's a milestone, and it's not only huge for the Venezuelan people and our future, I think it's a huge step for humanity, for freedom and human dignity.
Did you at any point offer to give him the Nobel Peace Prize? Did that actually happen? I had read that somewhere. I wasn't sure if it was true.
Well, it hasn't happened yet, but I certainly would love to be able to personally tell him that we believe the Venezuelan people, because this is a prize of the Venezuelan people, certainly want to give it to him and share it with him. What he has done, as I said, is historic. It's a huge step.
It's now just a fact of life that in order to get what you want from the United States, you have to essentially petition the king. You have to debase yourself, humiliate yourselves in hopes that maybe, just maybe, the megalomaniacal narcissist in charge feels adequately filleted, and only then
Wait, Punters, did you know that and it's really important because in Australia? What? You mean I can't say here? Don't we have free speech? So I recently just tried to get myself some media liability insurance, and it turns out no one will cover me. The Australian-based media liability insurance have declined to cover me for reasons as follows. I'm too small, talk about politics, and am too much of a risk for defamation. So even though all I do is commentary on journalism, I'm not doing original journalism here, and then I say what I think about that journalism, I'm too much of a risk to take on, apparently, in case somebody sues me. And that means I'm in the same boat as heaps of independent Aussie publishers and journalists, where if someone decides to sue me for something I've said, even if it's true, I'm screwed. Now, full disclosure, one company did actually agree to cover me for 1 year, and that will cost me $20,000 per year with a $20,000 deductible if someone does, in fact, decide to sue me. So yeah. Don't have a lazy 20 grand lying around, so I guess we're playing it fast and loose, like every other journalist here in Australia. So now, my only defense, before you go getting any ideas, Santos, is you, the punters out there that watch my videos. In fact, it's the fact that my videos reach millions of legendary punters like yourself every month that you would help me, hopefully, crowdfund my legal costs if anyone came after me. And because of my considerably large reach on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, everywhere, I can inflict some serious PR damage on whoever tries to come after me. And so, thankfully, I'm not too sure many people in Australia are dumb enough to take that kind of reputational hit. Oh, and there's also the fact I don't own anything. This is a rental. If someone did decide to sue, it wouldn't be all bad news for me because the media and algorithms would boost my content even more than they do now. You might remember Friendly Geordie seeming to double his subscription count during his battle with Barilaro, and everyone in Australia suddenly finding out all the dodgy stuff that this clearly upstanding citizen definitely did not do. But even more recently, independent journo Michael West, whose journalism I rely on to make all these Instagram reels, recently had to go through legal battles himself. Ended up having to pay nearly $50,000 that he managed to crowdfund from everyday punters like yourself pitching in to support him. Now, that case was ultimately dropped, but Westy points out that it was still a huge pain in the ass and hugely expensive. He burnt that 50 grand just on lawyer fees alone, just trying to settle the case.
Here is the grim warning for all of you. Anybody who posts on social media, if you post on social media or independent media, it can happen to you. It can happen to anybody. You can find yourself 40K down, 6 months of your life taken out, livelihood damaged by the legal profession.
Now, we'll get to the defamation problems in a second, and spoiler alert, Australia was once known as the defamation capital of the world. But first, I need to set you straight on something, because I don't think everyone fully realizes this. Are you sitting down? There is no right to free speech here in Australia. Don't take it from me.
Take it from the politicians themselves. Here's New South Wales Premier Chris Minns.
We don't have the same freedom of speech laws that they have in the United States.
We don't have the same freedom of speech laws that they have in the United States. Now I know what you're thinking. What the bloody hell? I definitely thought we had free speech here in Australia. It's probably because you and I have been watching far too many American movies.
In America, we have the freedom of speech, the right to disagree.
The US have the First Amendment written into their Bill of Rights. Congress shall pass no law, blah, 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 abridging the freedom of speech. We don't have one of those. We do have a constitution, which you can print out for yourself at the Parliament House website. I have taken the liberty to print off every section of our constitution that mentions our right to free speech. We'll just keep looking. No, there is something here. Okay, the constitution, this document right here, has no Bill of Rights, such as that found in the United States Constitution, which prevents the legislature from passing laws that infringe on basic human rights, such as freedom of speech. So our constitution only serves to tell us that we do not have freedom of speech like in the United States. Great, so I'm glad we cleared that up. We have no explicit right to freedom of speech here in Australia, punters. I am very sorry to say. Now, there is some sort of good news, I guess, and that is that the High Court says we do have an implied freedom of political communications. And basically, this is freedom from government restraint, but not a right conferred directly onto individuals such as myself. The TLDR, not good, but is it a problem? Well, let's take a look at what's going on in the real world, and it's not great. I have a few stats for you. Last year, Australia ranked 39 on the Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index, with the lowest ever score from that organisation. We did worse than countries like South Africa and Mauritania, which I did just Google and discover that that's a country I didn't know existed. And no shame on either of these countries, but you generally don't expect to see Australia lumped in the same category as South Africa and Mauritania. How do you say the country Mauritania?
You say it as Mauritania.
Now, tiny bit of good news. We did bounce up a bit in the press freedom rankings this year. But the point is, our actual freedom of the press is way out of whack with our self-image as one of the most free countries in the world. Okay, next stat for you. Australia is ranked second worst in the world for media concentration. Guess who's ahead of us on that one? Stop guessing. China. China is ahead of us. China, where the only media is government media. Our newspaper sector alone is dominated by 4 companies who control 84% of the market. That is called an oligopoly, dear punters. And most of that ownership is under the control of one Aussie bloke that lives in London. Name starting with M. Oh, was it Murdoch? That's right, Rupert Murdoch. Maybe you've heard of him. Next real world stat, the one about whistleblowers. You know, the people who speak out against corruption and wrongdoing and often end up in getting serious trouble and sometimes most often going to jail. Punters, whistleblower protections in this country are so piss weak that they have not yet to date protected anyone from prosecution. Great laws. If our birth control had a 0% protection rate from getting anyone pregnant, I think you'd stop calling it birth control. Guess what percentage of the population wants to change this? Is popular support to improve this situation. And despite Albo himself saying he wanted to change this, nothing has changed. Don't worry, punters. Maybe in the next 3-year term, he might do something about it. Moving on, defamation. I said we'd come back here. We were once known as the defamation capital of the world. That's because back in 2019, it was recording 10 times as many libel claims as the UK on a per capita basis. Sorry, just 1 second. Libel claim written. Okay. Do videos count? Damn it. Final stat, 49. That's the number of anti-protest laws that have been introduced in a bunch of states all across Australia, and according to the Human Rights Law Centre, have been criminalising people who are peacefully protesting. All of this adds up to not a pretty picture. If Australia was to be honest with us on its dating profile, it would have to read, loves silencing journalists, hates whistleblowers, and thinks protest is a dirty word. Australia is lying to you, and it's lying to itself. We don't have freedom of speech, and it seems to be getting worse. But it's not all bad news. You know who does have real freedom of speech in this country, though? Our politicians. They have something called parliamentary privilege, which is, get this, a privilege where they get to say whatever they want. Politicians have the freest speech of any Australians. Their workplaces are parliamentary chambers inside which they can literally say, get this, anything they want. Jeez, wouldn't that be nice? So I guess our politicians will never endure the indignity that I have just suffered after applying for media liability insurance, getting outright rejected, or just being handed ridiculous quotes I quite frankly can't afford. And all of this ultimately means I can't tell you about... I wish I could.
Well, for tonight's thought experiment, let's begin with consideration of the question of where would Nicolas Maduro be tonight if he was a drug trafficking, murdering, torturing dictator who hated Cuba and never supplied oil to Cuba. Marco Rubio wants you to believe that it's about this. It's all about this. Marco Rubio says that this 25-page indictment is the reason the United States of America invaded Venezuela and captured Nicolas Maduro and his wife. Most of the pages of the 25-page indictment do not attempt to describe crimes committed by Maduro or his wife. The indictment alleges that Maduro and his wife participated in a drug trafficking conspiracy. The only specifics offered about any criminal action involving Nicolas Maduro or his wife refer only to one meeting that his wife attended in 2007, 6 years before she married Maduro and long before Maduro became president of Venezuela. And according to the indictment, in that meeting, Maduro's future wife, quote, accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes to broker a meeting between a large-scale drug trafficker and the director of Venezuela's National Anti-Drug Office. That's it. No specifics about that. No indication of how they know that. And no meetings actually involving Nicolas Maduro are described in the indictment. This is as vague an indictment as you could imagine. But this is why Marco Rubio and Donald Trump launched their one-day war with Venezuela, according to Marco Rubio. The drug trafficking conspiracy described on page 9 of this indictment says the transshipment points in Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico similarly relied on a culture of corruption in which cocaine traffickers operating in those countries paid a portion of their own profits to politicians who protected them and aided them. And last month, Donald Trump pardoned one of the politicians described in that sentence on page 9 of this new indictment, the former president of Honduras. A politician referred to in this Trump Justice Department indictment was pardoned by Donald Trump last month, pardoned for drug trafficking scheme that is mentioned in the new indictment. Donald Trump already pardoned the Honduras guy. Donald Trump said this weekend that he pardoned the convicted drug trafficking president of Honduras because that former president of Honduras was prosecuted while Joe Biden was president of the United States. So any indictments of any drug traffickers during the Biden years are illegitimate according to Donald Trump. And Donald Trump's Justice Department rewrote that indictment, wrote a new indictment for Marco Rubio to stand behind, claiming that he did not wage war on Venezuela. He was simply using the military to enforce an arrest warrant for the Department of Justice. We'll have a more detailed discussion of the Maduro indictment later in this hour when Andrew Weissman joins us. Since Donald Trump's last consideration of a convicted of treason was to pardon him, there is absolutely no reason to believe that the indictment is why the United States invaded Venezuela. What Marco Rubio did in Venezuela after spending most of the last year, we now know, secretly masterminding the invasion of Venezuela and the capture of Nicolas Maduro, was the closest Marco Rubio could come right now to delivering on the dream that will never die. It is the dream of some Cuban Americans like Marco Rubio and other right-wing extremists in the United States, the dream many of them have held since April of 1961, when a similarly planned invasion of Cuba failed at the Bay of Pigs. 87 days into John F. Kennedy's presidency, the CIA executed a long-planned invasion of Cuba, a plan that began before the Kennedy presidency. The invasion was at the Bay of Pigs, and it was defeated by Fidel Castro, who personally commanded the Cuban Defense Forces at the point of battle. It was a full humiliation for the CIA and the American military, and for President Kennedy, who considered it the worst mistake of his presidency, which it most certainly was. It was a stain on American foreign policy that Americans forgot, but the world did not, especially Latin America. This is the way it was supposed to go. The Bay of Pigs was supposed to go the way Marco Rubio and the team executed the plan in Venezuela. Donald Trump can be presumed to be lying about every reason he gives for everything he does, having been documented by the Washington Post for pathologically telling over 30,000 lies during his first term as president. Everyone who can think has known from the start that Donald Trump's missile attacks on small boats with outboard motors off the coast of Venezuela were not about stopping drug trafficking. None of those boats could have reached the United States. They are all too small and don't carry enough fuel and could only reach the closest island, where they could have easily been intercepted. And now many observers feel vindicated in the belief that it was never about the drugs in those missile strikes, because Donald Trump has now said it's about the oil. But what if he's lying again? What if it is not about the oil? What if it is about Marco Rubio's dream? What if it's about Cuba?
Cuba is going to be something we'll end up talking about, because Cuba is a very badly failing nation, and we want to help the people of. It's very similar in the sense that we want to help the people in Cuba, but we want to also help the people that were forced out of Cuba and living in this country. Do you want to say something about that, Marco, please?
Well, I mean, I just gave you a statement a few minutes ago about, you know, when the president speaks, you should take him seriously. Suffice it to say, you know, Cuba is a disaster. It's run by incompetent, senile men, and in some cases, not senile, but incompetent nonetheless. It has no economy. It's in total collapse. And by the way, you know, they were, you know, all of the guards that helped protect Maduro, this is well known, their whole spy agency, all that were full of Cubans. I mean, they basically, it's amazing. This poor island took over Venezuela in some cases. One of the biggest problems the Venezuelans have is they have to declare independence from Cuba. They tried to basically colonize it from a security standpoint. So, yeah, look, if I lived in Havana and I was in the government, I'd be concerned, at least a little bit.
A little bit. Marco Rubio doesn't really care about Venezuela. Marco Rubio cares that Venezuela has provided oil for Cuba. Marco Rubio wants to starve Cuba of oil and all other resources. That has been the failed purpose of the American embargo on Cuba for our entire lifetimes. Donald Trump may understand none of this, or he might understand a little bit of it. But it doesn't seem impossible for Marco Rubio to convince Donald Trump of the glorious place in history for him if he becomes the American president who finally liberates Cuba from dictatorship, finally fulfills the dream that will never die. If starving Cuba of resources does not work, we have now seen the dress rehearsal for an invasion of Cuba aimed at regime change. If that happens, when a reporter asks who will be running Cuba, there would be no disagreement between Donald Trump and Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio would proudly announce that he is running Cuba if he gets that chance. If Cuba is the real target target. It serves Donald Trump's fog of confusion style to throw in threats to Colombia and Greenland and any other place he can think of while he's at it. There will never be a move of any kind against Greenland. Greenland is nothing but a Trump device for distraction, and it works. You will be able to find television discussions of, will they send troops to Greenland? Every second of that is nonsense, and every second of that is a successful Trumpian distraction from what they are really doing. President Kennedy was in the grip of very bad advice when he agreed to launch the Bay of Pigs invasion, an invasion that had been planned. The beginning of the planning occurred under President Eisenhower, the Republican president who preceded President Kennedy. American presidential politics has been in the grip of the Cuban-American dream of overthrowing dictatorship in Cuba ever since. And because Cuban Americans are concentrated in the important electoral college state of Florida, the United States of America has been politically, in effect, prevented through the mathematics of presidential politics from normalizing relations with the harmless little country 90 miles from Florida. Republicans in particular have spent the last 65 years lying about how threatening to the United States and the world the tiny country of Cuba is. And now Donald Trump and Marco Rubio have shown how easy it is to lie to a very supportive Republican Party and presumably Republican voters about what a threat to the national security of the United States Venezuela is. No one had ever heard that before, but they have succeeded on their side of our politics with that lie. Donald Trump believes the American military is his plaything, but the law and the Constitution says otherwise. The power to initiate war lies exclusively with Congress, and the power to initiate emergency military action for national defense rests with the president, but since 1973 requires the president to follow a formal notification process with Congress. That is the law. That law was violated by Marco Rubio willfully and Donald Trump willfully in their invasion of Venezuela. But today, Marco Rubio explained it all to our first guest tonight.
Operation Absolute Resolve was a meticulously planned raid involving 150 aircraft operating from 20 different US bases and Navy ships. Sequential strikes on radar and defence sites before Delta Force commandos seized Venezuela's president. Swift, precise, almost flawless. The Trump administration may not have put so much planning into what happens next. Or at least, it gives that impression.
Thank you very much. We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. The people that are standing right behind me, we're going to be running it.
Who are those people who will be running the country specifically?
So it's not running, it's running policy. The policy with regards to this.
Really, since the beginning of the administration, people have been speculating, some publicly, but most privately, as to when we would move against Venezuela. So this did not come as a surprise. It wasn't a shock to people who pay attention. The shock is that now, apparently, we're in charge of 30 million people in a country that is well larger than California.
If Nicolas Maduro had always been in Trump's crosshairs, at times the leader seemed to revel in the attention.
Soy más famoso que Taylor Swift en Estados Unidos ahorita. Que Karol G. Soy más famoso que Bad Bunny.
Inside Venezuela, the capture of Maduro was met, at first, with disbelief. The US raid came shortly after the nation's equivalent of April Fool's, St. Innocents Day.
It's actually the typical joke that you would make on St. Innocents Day. Oh, you know, Maduro fell, turn on the TV. And people are like, I'm not going to fall for that.
But Maduro's government remains intact.
It's the same Chavista troops, it's the same Chavista government. It's just that Maduro's not there. So people in Venezuela, I mean, there have been some scattered celebrations, but a lot of people are just afraid to celebrate.
Adding to the confusion, Trump has not encouraged Venezuela's opposition or endorsed its leader, last year's Nobel Peace Prize recipient, Maria Corina Machado.
She doesn't have the support within, or the respect within the country.
The opposition claimed it won elections held in 2024, but Maduro refused to cede power.
It is very concerning that the Trump administration is not putting the opposition and the sort of the will of the Venezuelan people first. Right now, what's being put first, at least in terms of the objective or the goal of post-Maduro Venezuela, is oil.
We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country.
Venezuela has vast oil reserves, with around 300 billion barrels in the ground, more than Saudi Arabia. But the nation remains poor, in part because the oil is largely untapped.
I mean, Venezuela was producing 3 million barrels when Chavez came to power. It's now producing 800, 900,000 barrels. It can easily go up at least to 2.5 million barrels in 3 to 5 years. If you do that, then the economy will boom.
The president says he targeted Maduro because he allows the export of drugs into the US, and partly because of historic grievances over its oil reserves.
We're going to take back the oil that, frankly, we should have taken back a long time ago.
US oil companies did lose contracts under former Venezuelan leader Hugo Chavez in 2007. But those disputes were fought out in international arbitration.
So what did Venezuela do after that? It started paying. Venezuela was paying the companies up until the end of 2018. Why did it stop in 2019? Because the US government imposed sanctions on it.
US political analyst Larry Sabato says Trump's motivation to capture Maduro may be much closer to home.
Why did he do it? Well, for one thing, Marco Rubio is Secretary of State, and this has been Marco Rubio's cause for many years during his entire time in the Senate, really. The Venezuelans are an important part of his base in Florida and helped him to win all of his Senate races there. And he feels very strongly about it for lots of different reasons. He thinks it's going to lead to a takeover by the United States in Cuba, which is where people need to be watching next.
Are you considering U.S. action in Cuba?
We're not. I think it's just going to fall. I don't think we need any action. It looks like it's going down.
Trump's former MAGA ally, Marjorie Taylor Greene, says the president is abandoning his supporters.
They voted to tear down the system that protects the rich, powerful elites. They voted to tear down the system that consistently goes for foreign wars and regime change. They voted to tear down the system that does nothing for regular, hardworking Americans.
Sabato says Trump's MAGA base will stick with him, despite the contradictions with his America First promises. He's in more trouble with the political centre.
People are not happy about this, and it isn't just because of what Trump said about running Venezuela. It's also because we now know enough about Donald Trump and his family and his billionaire buddies to know that there are going to be all kinds of money-making deals for them.
We need total access. We need access to the oil and to other things in their country that allow us to rebuild their country.
This afternoon, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez invited the US government to collaborate and cooperate with Venezuela. Maduro's successors must now balance America's demands with the challenges of running a weakened government.
It really has set up the current situation in Venezuela to lead to what usually happens in these situations, where you have a power vacuum with different factions of the leading regime vying for power, uncertainty, in terms of who will be in charge. And of course, that usually leads to a period of instability, violence, and just a lot of uncertainty.
Good night. Happy New Year.
It's not just Venezuela's Latin American neighbours who are now weighing the implications of this latest US military intervention. Scott Anderson is a former US diplomat and expert in international law and a fellow at the Brookings Institution. He joined me earlier from Washington. Scott Anderson, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
In your view, is the American intervention in Venezuela, including the extraction and arrest of its president, a breach of international law?
It really advances a view of international law that is very hard to reconcile either with how most countries view international law and how the United States has approached international law up to this point. That's not new necessarily. That was true of the maritime strikes the Trump administration has been pursuing as well. And I'm assuming that the legal theory for this action justifying international law is very similar to those. I think that's almost certainly correct. Although we actually haven't heard this administration put forward a straightforward international legal argument to date.
For want of a better explanation, we're hearing from the president that it was all an attempt to stop a narco-terrorist in the form of President Maduro. The narco-terrorism posed a direct threat to American national security. Therefore, the US had to go in. In international law terms, in your view as the expert, does that argument hold water?
I don't believe it does. International law under the UN Charter requires, before a state can use armed force against another state, it requires there to be an armed attack or an imminent threat of an armed attack. Now, the United States for a long time has taken a much broader view of what an armed attack is than a lot of other states. A lot of other states say it has to be pretty substantial scale and effects sort of violence. The United States has said really any sort of violence can work. But the United States has said in the context of cyber operations and other operations, things like economic sanctions, there has to be a kinetic effect. There has to be something that looks like the effects of a bomb or a bullet. That's what's missing here. They're linking narcotics trafficking and treating it as if it is a bomb or a bullet being hurled at the United States and at American nationals. And that is just a huge, huge leap. If you start saying that about narcotics trafficking, you can say that about all sorts of other activities, which it's always been understood was not supposed to be something that was supposed to give rise to the use of military force. Indeed, restricting the use of military force in response to those sorts of smaller incidents was what the UN Charter was all about. So it would be a pretty transformative change in understanding for the international system.
So you say it's a huge leap, an impossible leap when it comes to international law?
You know, impossible is hard to say, absolutely. There's a degree of innovation and advancing different views, change that at times the United States and other states, when they've engaged in novel interpretations and applications of international law, they engage in international legal diplomacy to try and persuade other states of it. They make the argument saying, here's why we should be viewing international law. Trump administration has not done that, or if it's trying, it's not doing it very effectively.
We have President Trump just in the last couple of hours now not ruling out military action in Colombia. Can we expect to see more of these type of actions by the Americans?
That's a good question, and I don't know, to be honest. The one thing I will note is that the Maduro case is a little bit of a strange case, for the simple reason that Maduro was a genuine policy problem, and Venezuela is a genuine policy problem for the United States, for really the broader international community, certainly for many countries in the Western Hemisphere. And Maduro had taken on a weird significance for this administration. For months now, we've heard them say, we're going to force Maduro out of power. And it became a big political constraint for them. It became a commitment that they felt they needed to make good on. And that's the reporting we've come out today. In a New York Times report today, we heard a story that the Trump administration actually offered Maduro gilded exile in Turkey, but 2 or 3 weeks ago, saying you can leave the country and you can retire in luxury. When he declined to do that, when he's kind of publicly flaunting the fact that he was refusing to cooperate with the United States, that's what led to this operation. To me, that suggests that there's an element of this that might be primarily face-saving, a desire to achieve a victory that will allow them to then de-escalate potentially what has become a very costly and politically controversial here in the United States military campaign against narcotics traffickers and military buildup in the Caribbean. So it's possible this may be more of an off-ramp to further hostility. facilities, whatever bluster we might be hearing from the administration. That said, we do have to wait and see. This administration has proven more willing to use military force than the first Trump administration. That is a trend I have no doubt will continue. I'm not sure that means, though, they're going to be willing to wage war over Greenland or Cuba or Colombia or any of the other targets that the president sometimes mentions in errand remarks.
What happens next is very interesting. We had the president talking about the US running Venezuela. The Secretary of State has walked that back a bit over the last 24 hours, but it's clear the US wants a pliant leader in Venezuela going forward. How do you see the governance of Venezuela now unfolding after what happened over the weekend?
In my mind, that's really the big question to look at moving forward, not least because the United States' position on this is really unclear. What President Trump said yesterday is in pretty clear tension with what has been his own administration's policy up to this point. Remember, in 2019, President Trump's first administration was the first to break from recognizing Maduro and to lead much of the international community in doing so, and to instead recognize Juan Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela by virtue of his status as the head of the National Assembly. This was a body that was elected in 2015. It represents a lot of the opposition movement and has been hailed as kind of the last valid democratic institution of Venezuela. That really is in tension with this idea now, saying, well, we've said all for the last several years, this other group is the legitimate government or the last legitimate institutional government for the Venezuelan government, but now we're not going to let them run the country. We're going to go essentially to the Maduro regime, sans Maduro, and put them in power. We also have to remember there was an election last year, and Secretary Rubio himself is on the record saying that the surrogate candidate for the opposition leader, Machado, who eventually stood in her place after she was disqualified from the election, won that election. So if you say they've won the election, they are the legitimate winners, then why are they not the people being put in charge of this country? But the Trump administration isn't dealing honestly with that, and it isn't really providing a clear sense of where it's going in terms of how it sees Venezuela is going to be managed. It's entirely possible it doesn't know itself yet. It's still figuring that out.
The whole world is watching. What message does the events over the last weekend, in your view, send to people like President Xi in our neighbourhood? China has very publicly stated ambitions towards Taiwan. What message does the American action in Venezuela send to somebody like him?
There's a strong element where you can read this message through, or this action through a lot of different lenses. It's possible you read it through an action about saying, well, you read the Trump administration's national security strategy that came out last month, and it really seems to suggest a spheres of influence model, suggesting that China, Russia, and the United States as kind of the three major powers should essentially each get to dominate a degree of sphere of influence and just have to work on balancing each other properly. And you could read that lens to say, well, maybe that means that Russia gets to win in Ukraine more than the Biden administration allowed it, and that China gets to win around Taiwan. At the same time, Russian and Chinese influence in Venezuela was a major factor cited as a reason for this intervention and a reason for opposing Maduro for the last several years, just as that sort of intervention is cited as a reason why U.S. needs greater influence in Greenland and in other contexts. So I'm not sure, again, the administration is being entirely coherent or clear on this. There are very clearly people with very different views winning on different policy fights, and what the underlying strategy is really hard to tell.
Certainly a volatile start to 2026. Scott Anderson, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
The extraordinary intervention in Venezuela has divided world leaders, some outraged, others delighted. Here at home, the reaction has been relatively quiet, with the Albanese government also under pressure to establish a federal royal commission into the Bondi attack and anti-Semitism. 7:30's political editor Jacob Grieber has more.
The first substantive Australian government reaction to Donald Trump's raid on Venezuela.
We've expressed our concerns for some time about the Maduro regime in Venezuela.
With the Treasurer making it clear there are unanswered questions about former President Nicolas Maduro's capture by US forces.
We are supporters of international law, and it's for the Americans to make clear the legal basis of the steps taken over the weekend.
In other words, a cautious, muted response from the government on whether US actions have undermined the rules-based order that Australia endorses. By contrast, the opposition had few qualms.
The human rights abuses, the crushing of freedom and democracy in that country,
makes it very obvious that Maduro's removal has been a good thing.
The dramatic events in Venezuela have acted as something of a circuit breaker for the Albanese government, which is under pressure over its decision not to establish a federal royal commission into anti-Semitism. With the events of Bondi still raw, calls for such an inquiry have grown in recent days.
Come down off your high horse and stop trying to run for cover. If the Jewish community is calling for a royal commissioner, then do the right thing by this community, and that has suffered enough.
Yesterday, Dawn Fraser joined other prominent sports people calling for a full-blown inquiry, echoing similar demands from business leaders and members of the judiciary. Members of the crossbench are also agitating.
We clearly need to be looking at anti-Semitism, but I think we need to look more broadly at extremism and the kind of motivations behind these sorts of terror attacks. And I think looking into what we've been warned for many years by intelligence agencies is the biggest threat to Australia, is that is homegrown terrorism.
The root of this hatred is radical Islam, and it needs to be addressed. Our social cohesion is fraying. This is not the country that we all know and love. It feels as if it has slipped away, which is why a Commonwealth Royal Commission is so incredibly important.
For now, the government is not budging and has already set up an inquiry into whether security agencies missed signs that could have prevented the December 14th killings. It is also committed to assisting a New South Wales Royal Commission.
That's been the government's focus on what is urgent and what is immediate. We understand, obviously, that there are a number of Australians who would like to see a Commonwealth Royal Commission. We respect those people. We understand that those calls are coming from a good place.
I think we should be using something like a Royal Commission to not only ensure that we are looking at everything that potentially went wrong, what we can do in the future to prevent these sorts of attacks, but also ensure that the community feels like they're being taken seriously.
Despite the push for a Royal Commission, there are opponents.
Royal Commissions have a habit of being extended, they have a habit of branching out.
Prominent criminal defence barrister Robert Richter, a critic of the Israeli government's occupation of the Palestinian territories, last month refused to sign a letter backed by more than 130 senior legal figures calling for a federal royal commission.
If there was to be a bona fide commission, it requires deep thought, deep preparation, deep research.
Free Palestine!
One of his key concerns is that the definition of anti-Semitism would be in dispute, including whether criticism of the Israeli government should be included.
It has to be one that allows Jews, including non-Zionist Jews, post-Zionist Jews, anti-Zionist Jews, and there are some, there are quite a few. It would have to include those views in order to come to some conclusions about what constitutes anti-Semitism.
Royal commissions are invariably framed by political calculations, but calling one into the Bondi attack is still a possibility, even though it's not currently the government's main game. For now, it's working on tougher hate speech laws, which could be taken to an early sitting of Parliament in the second half of January.
I was expecting that Parliament would have been recalled by now. I think the public expects politicians to drop everything and actually start looking at how do we ensure that we're tightening up the relevant legislation. Is if it's around hate speech, if it's to do with gun control.
I think the important thing here is that we learn the lessons of that horrifying atrocity on the beach and in the park at Bondi. And there are a number of ways to go about that.
In the early hours of January 3rd, the Trump administration staged an invasion of Venezuela, violating international and domestic law. The raid included sorties from more than 150 airframes, every branch of the military except the space dorks and the FBI, also dorks. A few hours later, Trump announced that Venezuela's dictator, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife had been captured. Tactically speaking, brilliant execution. 5 out of 5 would employ Delta Force again. A mad dictator is nothing new. But while this situation feels like Iraq II Maduro Boogaloo, the legal theories the Trump administration is invoking to justify this military action against Venezuela are rooted in US domestic law, not international law like the global war on terror. They describe it as a law enforcement mission to force Maduro to face US criminal charges filed in 2020. And so, grand jury indictment in hand, they carried out a warrant for his arrest. You know, standard cop stuff with gunships. Which is all the more insane because Trump took to the pulpit to tell the American people he was seizing control of their government and natural resources.
That means we're in charge. We're going to run everything. We're going to run it, fix it. We're in the business of having countries around us that are viable and successful, and where the oil is allowed to freely come out because that's good, it gets the prices down.
We'll get to why that plan is stupid and stupidly illegal, but right now the head of a foreign state is making their way through the criminal court of the Southern District of New York on some interesting charges, including conspiracy to acquire a machine gun. So let's dive into what the hell just happened and what happens next. Nicolas Maduro is unquestionably a brutal and prolific violator of human rights. He imprisoned and tortured his political enemies, journalists, protesters, and even ordinary citizens in a foul of his administration. In short, he sucks at life. And back in 2017, when his power was slipping in the face of widespread protest, Maduro forced the country's legislature to rewrite the constitution to give him even more power. The next year, Maduro called an election but banned his opponents, suppressed voter turnouts, and imprisoned the competition. Classic sham election. Wouldn't you know it, the rascal did it again in 2024. And these sham elections are why the United States, Europe, and most of South and Central America do not recognize him as the legitimate leader of Venezuela. And under Maduro's interesting economic policies, Venezuela plunged from one of the fastest growing economies in South America in the early 2000s to an absolute hellscape of food scarcity, crime, disease, and child mortality, where the national currency was worth less than the paper it was printed on. This economic catastrophe triggered a wave of mass migration that destabilized an entire region. An estimated 7.7 million people fled. That's 20% of Venezuela's population. About 500,000 landed in the US. Trump has repeatedly played up unfounded scare stories about these Venezuelan migrants.
They sent from their mental institutions, they sent from their jails, prisons. They were drug dealers, they were drug kingpins. They sent everybody bad into the United States, but no longer.
In fact, it's fair to say that Donald Trump has been fixated on Venezuela since coming to power. During Trump's first term, he repeatedly instituted sanctions against Venezuela and even invited the Venezuelan opposition leader to be a special guest at the 2020 State of the Union address. And in March of 2020, the first Trump administration indicted Maduro, his wife, and a dozen of his henchmen with narco-terrorism, corruption, drug trafficking, and other criminal charges. But in Trump's second term, this obsession with Maduro went off the rails. Trump's DOJ launched an investigation into the thoroughly debunked right-wing conspiracy theory that Venezuela was a secret squirrel in the Biden crime family's scheme to steal the 2020 election from the rightfully elected Trump. And Truth Social repost this year, Trump doubled down on these accusations. In March, Trump designated Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization and claimed that Maduro was, in fact, the leader of that gang. Trump argued that this allowed him to deport Venezuelans to a Salvadoran torture prison with no due process. The courts weren't buying it, but the administration kept doing it anyway. In August, Trump issued a $50 million bounty on Maduro. In September, Trump and Pete Hegseth started their murder strikes on Venezuelan boats, which have killed at least 115 civilians that we know of. As we've talked about before, the administration justified this by arguing that the boats were manned by drug traffickers, hell-bent on poisoning the US population with fentanyl. Now, the administration has yet to provide any evidence that fentanyl was on any of these boats, and across every edition of the DEA's National Drug Threat Assessment, including their 2025 assessment, Venezuela never appears as a fentanyl source or transit country. These boat strikes are definitely illegal. The order to kill the survivors of the September 2nd boat strike was especially illegal. Now, by the basic framework of international law, strikes against civilian vessels are typically considered either an act of war or just plain old murder. But Trump continued to escalate. On November 29th, Trump declared with no legal authority whatsoever that the airspace over Venezuela was closed. Then he blockaded Venezuelan oil tankers. Again, by the standards of international law, this is generally considered an act of war. So we're seeing a theme here, that the Trump administration continues to test how far to push the boundaries of international law. And so, at about 2 a.m. local time on January 3rd, the administration made good on its threats and launched a series of strikes on the Venezuelan capital of Caracas and several other Venezuelan military targets. You know, war stuff, not cop stuff. Cops don't have ballistic missiles yet.
Sorry to interrupt, Scala, but this is the #1 news story in the world right now, and I'm absolutely fascinated by how it's being covered differently by different sources. Depending on which sources you follow, you might come away thinking that you're watching entirely different events unfold, and that's the real danger. Facts don't necessarily shape public opinion, framing does. And with a story this big developing this fast across hundreds of outlets, it's nearly impossible to get the full picture without the right tools. That's why I rely on Ground News for today's video. When Donald Trump said that the US is going to run Venezuela, over 700 sources covered the story. And with Ground News, I can scroll down to see every article and compare headlines to see how each side is framing the story. And those frames can have subtle differences that make a huge impact on how readers interpret what Trump actually said. Reporting from the right typically frames his statements as a temporary measure to oversee a transition of political power. In contrast, headlines on the left use phrasing like indefinitely, suggesting much more akin to annexation or occupation. And reporting from the center is a surprisingly mixed bag of charged phrasing, with one headline even writing the US is set to rule Venezuela. The same event, 3 completely different realities. And this is why Ground News has been my go-to for staying informed since 2023, and being a longtime supporter of this channel and independent news media at large. Because Ground News is an app and website that aggregates news from thousands of sources around the world in one place. For every story, it breaks down bias, factuality, and ownership, and allows us to compare how different sources cover the same story. So you don't just react to the headlines, you understand the structure behind them. And another crucial tool is their blind spot feed, which reveals stories that are disproportionately reported by either side of the political spectrum. It's often the stories we don't see that shape public perception the most. And Ground News knows them all. So if you care about context and evidence, like I do, I recommend you check out Ground News. It's a tool I personally rely on top of breaking news clarity. And as an eaglet, you can get 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage plan, the same one that I use by scanning the QR code on screen or clicking on the link below. By subscribing, you'll also support an independent news platform that's working to make the media landscape more transparent and balanced. So sign up for Ground News today, or I'll see you in court.
While more than 150 aircraft from multiple branches of the US military pounded bases and other targets in and around Caracas, helicopters carried Delta Force soldiers and FBI personnel into the city. At least 80 people were killed in the attack, and multiple areas of the city were left smoldering, including the port. A few hours later, Trump announced on Truth Social that Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, had been captured and were being flown out of the country. Pam Bondi then announced via tweet, as one does, that Maduro and Flores had been indicted on multiple drug and weapons-related charges and would, quote, face the full wrath of American justice on American soil in American courts. Good for you, Pam, for keeping the hope of due process alive. By 2026 standards, that's progress. But it's hard not to see this as an unauthorized act of war, not policing. Under Article 1 of the Constitution, only Congress has the power to declare war. And under the War Powers Resolution, the president almost always has to consult Congress before engaging in hostilities. So failing to consult with Congress is both illegal and unconstitutional. This didn't sit well with Trump.
They should say, great job. They shouldn't say, oh, gee, maybe it's not constitutional. You know, the same old stuff that we've been hearing for years and years and years.
You know, if I heard that I was doing that same old stuff of unconstitutionality for years and years and years, I might give it the tiniest bit of credence. Well, under that same law, codified under 50 U.S.C. Section 1543, the administration was also required to provide Congress within 48 hours the circumstances necessitating the introduction of United States, the constitutional and legislative authority under which such introduction took place, and the estimated scope and duration of the hostilities or involvement. At the time of this recording, we did not find sufficient evidence that these requirements had been met. But in the press conference with Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio shortly after the operation, they seemed to suggest that they didn't have to, because this was cop stuff, not war stuff.
This was an arrest of 2 indicted fugitives of American justice, and the Department of War supported the Department of Justice in that job. Now, there are broader policy implications here, but it's just not the kind of mission that you can pre-notify because it endangers the mission.
But this framework of a law enforcement action contradicts Trump's insane statements about the ultimate purpose of removing Maduro.
We're going to run it, essentially, until such time as a proper transition can take place.
Now, if you listen to Green Day's American Idiot on a shiny little plastic saucer, this whole thing should feel eerily familiar.
The transition from dictatorship to democracy will take time, but it is worth every effort. Our coalition will stay until our work is done. And then we will leave. And we will leave behind a free Iraq.
Like Iraq, Venezuela is a very oil-rich country. It has the world's largest supply of untapped oil, about 303 billion barrels of stuff.
Go in, spend millions, fix the badly broken oil industry, and start making money for the country.
And again.
We built that whole industry there, and they just took it over like we were nothing, and we had a president that decided not to do anything about it.
And again.
In other words, we'll be selling oil probably in much larger doses because they couldn't produce very much because their infrastructure was so bad. So we'll be selling large amounts of oil to other countries, many of whom are using it now, but I would say many more will come.
Wow. Look, there's a lot to unpack, and we're going to be talking more in a future video about the international laws designed to keep these kinds of things in check. But most essential right now is to dissect the administration's legal rationale for doing a full-send Team America World Police. The administration's central legal theory behind why they feel the law gives them the right to obliterate downtown Caracas is that this was a military action in support of the extraterritorial arrest of Maduro. He was, after all, indicted by a federal grand jury for crimes against the United States and thus a wanted man. But he's also an acting head of state, even if all the cool countries in the UN dispute his legitimacy. And that matters, because the US signed the UN Charter, which includes Article 2, Sub 4, quote, all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. This is a treaty that has the force of federal law. There's an extension to this, unwritten, that says foreign heads of state cannot be prosecuted by national courts. This is called head of state immunity, and is an example of what we call customary international law. Everybody agrees to do their best to follow customary international law in good faith, and it has the force of law. Here's a simple illustration. In many societies, standing in line isn't written into any law, but it's expected and respected. In fact, it's so expected that if you were to cut in line and cause a scene, a jury very well may find you guilty of disorderly conduct, despite the fact that, again, there's no written codified law that mandates standing in line. Despite head of state immunity and customary international law, the Trump administration believes that sending American cops to arrest a foreign head of state doesn't violate the law. There are two main strands of executive branch legal thought at play here. The first is a very controversial 1989 Office of Legal Counsel memo by Bill Barr, yeah, that guy, arguing that the FBI may use its statutory authority to investigate and arrest individuals for violating United States law, even if the FBI's actions contravene customary international law or unexecuted treaties or treaty provisions, such as Article 2, Sub 4 of the United Nations Charter. Remember how I said earlier that the FBI was involved in this mission? Well, that's surprisingly legally relevant. You see, back in 1989, Uncle Sam was once again obsessed with taking out a troublesome CIA asset turned dictator of Panama, Manuel Noriega. In his 22-page memo, Barr asserts that because the Constitution commands the president to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, the president, through the FBI, has constitutional authority to ignore international law. But faithfully executing the treaties of the nation is also required under the Constitution, since treaties have the force of federal law. And this is why the memo is so controversial. It proposes a recursive paradox in which the Constitution compels the president to faithfully uphold the law by ignoring it. Now, it's important to note that the Office of Legal Counsel is part of the executive branch, and rarely will the Supreme Court be involved in issues like this. They're interpreting the law, but often with a heavy thumb from the White House. OLC memos carry significant weight for the executive branch, but they're not the law, and they don't carry the same precedential effect of a court's opinion. Regardless, this was convincing enough for the George H.W. Bush administration to send the Marines into Panama, and Trump's legal counsel likely advised him to do the same. Second, the Trump administration will also probably argue, as it has in LA and Portland and several other cities, that the president has the inherent authority to use the military to protect federal institutions and officers in the exercise of federal law enforcement actions. This is sometimes known as unit self-defense, and that may justify having some National Guard members standing around looking fierce and bored while ICE agents throw flashbangs into people's cars, but it probably isn't going to justify sending Blackhawks and Chinooks and bombs into a foreign capital. It's worth saying again, the administration hasn't really provided any kind of legal justification here. We're doing their homework for them and presenting the most favorable, although legally dubious, arguments for them. But look, that is a lot of executive power, especially when you consider that this president doesn't think he needs to consult Congress to send 150 plus planes and helicopters in and start bombing a country, as long as some feds are munching on some arepas in downtown Caracas while Delta Force is busy kicking down doors. Because it's still just cop stuff. So let's parse the logic here. First, the FBI goes into Venezuela to arrest a foreign national who's a fugitive of US law, Maduro, without the consent of the sovereign nation he resides in. Second strand, wow, look at all those Soviet machine guns and air defense on the roof and nearby military bunkers.
There are pillboxes built into the mountain right there with firing positions on the high ground, armed guard towers, and continuous 24/7 patrols.
The FBI is gonna need military assistance. Gunships, F-22s, B-1s, JDAMs, and big angry boats. That's all federal material that needs to be protected while in use. Therefore, whatever military action is needed to effectuate the arrest is lawful. Let's take a step back. This means that whenever a grand jury in some federal district indicts a foreign national, the president is authorized to use military force to effectuate the arrest of that defendant. No declaration of war, no authorization of military force, just the simple executive decision to defend federal officers in the exercise of their duties abroad. This is obvious bootstrapping. It's a stupid legal theory crafting of the Bart Simpson belligerent strategy that could have catastrophic consequences for global peace and stability.
If you get hit, it's your own fault.
So, sorry, France. The FBI might just start swinging their arms, and that means the Marines are coming for Roman Polanski and feeling awfully twitchy with their trigger fingers. So where's all of this going? As horrific and depressing as events like these are, the law is not a static construct. And while law is crafted by policy, it's shaped by interpretation. We've been here before, and that means there's legal precedent. So looking at the closest historic analog to what just happened in Venezuela gives a tremendous level of insight into how the Trump administration's legal rationale might ultimately play out in the long run. And we don't have to look back very far. If you remember listening to Green Day's 39 Smooth on a tiny angle, this might all seem eerily familiar. Because in 1989 to 1990, the George H.W. Bush administration invaded Panama to arrest dictator Manuel Noriega, which happened exactly 36 years ago to the day. Do with that what you will. Noriega was actually a former CIA asset who was useful to the US interest in violently suppressing communism in Central America. But his relationship with the US government soured when he started advocating for more independence and accepting bribes to allow drugs into the US. In December 1989, Panamanian soldiers killed US Marine Lieutenant Robert Paz, wounded another service member, and beat a Navy couple. In response, President H.W. Bush sent more than 20,000 troops to invade Panama, with the stated goals of Captain Noriega to face drug charges in the United States, protecting American lives and property, and restoring democracy in Panama. The administration called this Operation Just Cause. Just to be clear, whenever the name of the operation explicitly implies legal authority, you know you have a legal problem. Fun fact for your trivia team, Operation Enduring Freedom, the invasion of Afghanistan after 9/11, was initially named Operation Infinite Justice. It was very... Now, like Trump, H.W. Bush did not get congressional authorization for his invasion and didn't invoke the War Powers Act. But unlike Trump, he did at least give Congress a heads up a few hours in advance. Crucially, Bush legally justified his actions by claiming that the United States was acting in self-defense. The U.S. had the right to protect and defend the Panama Canal under the Panama Canal Treaty, and thus the right to defend the invading force deployed. There's that Bill Barr opinion in action. How convenient. But there's one critical difference in the Panama conflict that may work against Trump in using it as the basis of his legal justification to strike Venezuela, Cuba, Greenland, or wherever his blood-soaked adventure takes him next. The Panamanian National Assembly, under Noriega's control, passed a resolution declaring that Panama was in a state of war with the United States. This is the closest we get to the imminency standard in an inherent Article 2 context that allows the president to take immediate military action without the consent of Congress if there's a clear and present danger to the United States. This is in contrast to Congress's Article 1 power, which grants them exclusive authority to declare war. Is declaring that the nation is in a state of war the same as declaring war? It's debatable. But the Trump administration doesn't have that. Maduro's course of escalation ranged from theatrical saber-rattling to, we're good, bro, let's give peace a chance. So it's unclear whether this precedent gives legal authority versus political authority to take the actions at issue. And this is a developing story, Make sure to keep an eye on the channel for our ongoing coverage and analysis. But man, it really makes you wonder, why start an armed conflict when this kind of South American dictator swapping was perfected by the CIA? Also dorks. Very, very good at their job, dorks.
Now, all this highlights why it's so important to get a great lawyer when you're dealing with your own case. Now, after we started this channel, every week I'd get hundreds of comments and emails from viewers saying, "The lawyer, how do I know if this attorney is any good?" And there's a massive gap in our justice system. It's that people don't know how to find the right lawyer for their specific situation. They're scared, they're overwhelmed, and they end up doing nothing or hiring the first attorney who calls them back. And that really bothered me. So I started to wonder, what if there was a different way? What if we could build a law firm that actually lived up to the values that I talk about on this channel? Transparency, accessibility, and putting clients first instead of chasing billable hours. A firm where you don't need to pay anything up front, and your lawyers only get paid if you do, to maximize your opportunity for justice. So a few years ago, I decided to fix that problem. I decided to start my own personal injury law firm. And honestly, it wasn't an easy choice. But I realized I was in this unique position. I had this platform, this community, and the experience. Not to get rich, trust me, there are easier ways to make money than starting a law practice. But we did it because access to justice shouldn't be a luxury. Because finding the right legal representation shouldn't feel like playing Russian roulette with your future. And when you work with my firm, you're not just getting a lawyer. You're getting a team that understands that behind every case is a real person with real stakes. If we can't represent you, or you're in a state where we don't practice, we'll take the time to try to match you with an attorney in my personal network of lawyers. A national network of some of the best lawyers in the country who actually specialize in what you're going through, located right where you are, not just whoever happens to be available. So if you're dealing with a personal injury, a car crash, a data breach, sexual harassment, a social security or workers' comp issue, give us a call at the number on screen or click on the link below. Now, I can't represent everyone that watches this channel. I wish I could, but what I can do is make sure that when you need legal help, you have somewhere to turn to that you can trust. So whether it's me handling your case or the incredible attorneys we partnered with, you'll get the same principles of honesty and education that we bring to every video. And if you're dealing with a legal issue and you're not sure where to start, check out the link in the description. Let's have a conversation about how we can help you find not just a lawyer, but the right lawyer for your situation. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, making sure that when life gets complicated, you don't have to face it alone. Which is why when you need a lawyer, you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle team.
The Supreme Court is reshaping American law at a scale we will deflect the trajectory of Trump's presidency. Today's guest, Dahlia Lithwick, has been covering the court longer than almost anyone in journalism. She's a senior editor at Slate and host of the award-winning podcast Amicus. On today's show, she takes us behind the curtain of the Supreme Court. She breaks down the blockbuster cases still to come and answers the most important questions of our time. Is this court too powerful, too political, and too unaccountable? And if so, how do we fix it? But before we get into it, subscribe to this channel to stay informed about how you can defend democracy. Dahlia Lithwick, welcome to Defending Democracy.
It's good to be with you.
I got to ask you kind of your backstory, right? You grow up in Canada. You come to the United States for college, you go to Yale, and then you get your law degree in Stanford. I guess my first question is, have you decided the sensible thing is to actually give up on this whole America thing and go back to Canada?
I got married in Toronto to a U.S. citizen, and the joke that my big brother made at my wedding, which feels, that was 25 years ago in 2 months, which feels very too on the nose right now, as he sort of like lifted his wine glass and said, everybody thinks that Dahlia's marrying Aaron for the green card, but some of us actually think he's marrying her for the exit to Canada. And at the time, exactly, people laughed uncomfortably and didn't get it, and now it seems weirdly prophetic. I mean, I will just sort of soberly say this much, and I'm still a green card holder. I will say this, Mark. I think that sometimes it helps to be on the inside and the outside thing. I think, and you've written about this as much as anybody, that there is a sort of American exceptionalist bias that leads people to reflexively say, this is the best, sanest, only competent democracy in the world. And I think sometimes when you come from somewhere else, and I'm not comparing myself to de Tocqueville or to, Hannah Arendt, but I think that it sometimes helps to come from a place where you can see two things at once. And one of those things is that there are lots of democracies and they experiment with lots of things and rise and fall. And some are better in some ways and some are worse. And also to be able to say that the American notion that democracy begins and ends at the 50 states is not always right. And maybe the best concrete example I can give of that is I interviewed on my show like a year ago, Rosalie Abella, who is a justice on the Canadian Supreme Court, and she had just stepped down and could speak freely, and she was just like, y'all are bonkers. Like, if you think that lifetime tenure, no, removal provisions, no ethics rule, like, she was really clear that no Supreme Court in the world is as unbounded as the Canadian Supreme Court. And people listened to that and they were like, well, but that's just Canada. But no, like, that's how other democracies cabin their Supreme Court. So I think it's useful to me to be kind of in the world and not entirely of the world, because I think it helps ground you in the fact that American exceptionalism can blind you to some of the real flaws.
I mean, you are one of the most looked to experts on the Supreme Court, the definitive podcast on the Supreme Court, which we're going to talk about. But I want to pick up on your observation. You know, there are kind of two critiques that people make of the Supreme Court. One is a structural one. You know, lifetime tenure, we should have term limits, we should have an ethics code, we should have, you know, a bigger expanded court. You know, they're sort of structural. The other critique that you hear is more personal, like it is the people we have on the Supreme Court. You know, it is maybe that they were selected in a process that is more partisan now, or they're more predictably ideological, or they're too conservative, and they're not in touch enough with the, you know, the lives of the country today. They don't respect precedent, right? But they're kind of like, they're about the individual justices. And I'm curious, given your a little bit of distance, but also as, like I said, one of the leading observers of the Supreme Court, like, which is it?
It's both. I think that they both exist flawlessly together, Mark. I think that it is structurally unsound in a million ways to have a, counter-majoritarian branch of government that exists and has always existed, right? I think we forget that, but for like a good 20-year run in there, from Brown v. Board till, name the date, the court has always existed as a mechanism to protect the wealthy and the privileged and the white and the powerful, and right, we know this. And if you think about the sort of structural piece of it, and again, you and I both talk about this a lot, but it can't possibly be the case that we are now sitting with a Supreme Court that determines structurally, what the law is, and it is, its members are selected by a minority-majority president, right? A president who, for all the reasons we can talk about, does not reflect the majority will, right? As a deliberate anti-democratic measure. And then the anti-democratic Senate, right? The minority-majority Senate, who, so Montana has the same amount of senators as California, then seats and confirms those justices, right? So we now have a whole slew of justices, the majority of the justices, who are seated by presidents who lost the popular vote, and then confirmed by senators who, like, in the exponentially huge numbers, reflect the minority of the population. And then that court turns around and does Shelby County, right, and does Ferruccio. So we have a perfect self-executing circle of anti-democratic structures that exist to perpetuate themselves. And then that court goes ahead and constricts a vote further. So I don't know if I've explained that very well, but I think it is a machine that exists to perpetuate minority rule, and that's what we live in. That's the structural critique. Does that preclude the fact that we happen to have, a 6-3 MAGA installed juggernaut that wants to destroy democracy? Why, no, it does not. I think those two things exist perfectly side by side, and I don't think I have to pick a lane. And I would say they're also mutually reinforcing, right? It's not an accident that the institution that exists to protect minority power in the face of actual democracy has ceded, in the face of democratic preferences, a 6-3 and
Biggest. I'm wondering if you have this in when you interview people on your podcast, because you interview a lot of lawyers on your podcast who have to do with the Supreme Court. And maybe you're going to tell me this is also a uniquely American trait. There is kind of like within the American exceptionalism, there is like the lawyers' Supreme Court exceptionalism. I was struck that like during the Biden era, there was a Supreme Court Reform Commission or whatever that came to the conclusion that like everything was basically fine. Like, and these are people handpicked by like Joe Biden's administration. And, it's finding lawyers, by the way, lawyers left of center. I'm not talking about like, Paul Clement, who's a very prominent and well-respected lawyer on the right. I'm talking about people on the left, like finding them who will criticize the Supreme Court and say this is fundamentally problematic is really hard. There's something about being a lawyer in the United States, I think, or maybe you'll tell me it's about being a Supreme Court litigator, or maybe you'll tell me it's about being in DC, maybe you'll tell me it's about the clerkships or the fact they went to law schools like you did. I don't know what it is, but have you noticed this kind of like reticence by, frankly, the people who should know the best, right? The people who have the most upfront experience with the court.
It was interesting. I had on my show last week, Sherilyn Ifill was on the show, sort of legendary civil rights attorney who helmed the NAACP Legal Defense Fund for a long time. And she made the characterological point that you're making, which is the kinds of people who come here then become the kinds of people who try to troubleshoot the problem, that you're describing, which is like, oh my God, I'm totally in love with my captors at the Supreme Court. Like there can be nothing more just or more perfect than the Supreme Court, and we can quibble about whether Anthony Kennedy, is really a swing justice, but at the end of the day, this is the end. And then you begin to get into that, if the only tool you have is an amicus brief, everything looks like it can be solved within the law. And so I think you're right. There is a kind of the kind of person who becomes a lawyer and who litigates, present company accepted, tends to just work within the guideposts and the structures of the institutions. And so they have to presume good faith, I think, in order to do the work. So that's part of it. I think it's just, there's a reason none of us went to med school, right? Like we have a personality that really thrives on that kind of structure. I think you're also right to say, and this is, we've had this conversation in terms of, abuse of clerks, by federal judges that never gets reported. We've had this conversation in terms of the ethics rules. I mean, I think it's such a powerful system, Mark, that the people who work within it are always transactional, right? And so, whether it's I'm a law professor and I need to get my students the right clerkships because everything, if I get 3 clerks placed as opposed to, 5 clerks, I've had a bad year. And the entire structure functions that way so that it's almost feudal, right? Like this is how the Medicis did it, and this is how we do it. And so I think there is both of those. I love that my answer to every one of your questions is both. But so far that's been, but I think both of those things are true. I think that there is, I think you and I were on some of the same calls when the immunity decision came down. Yep. And we were listening to people be like, okay, well, what is the outer perimeter of executive power? What are like trying to parse this as though like now we can win cases if we can just, close read the language of this case as though this is really a doctrinally serious proposition. And I think you and I in some of those calls were like, what the hell has even happened? Like, why are we trying to find lawyerly solutions to the most nihilist decision about executive power we've ever seen? So I think some of it is just the temperament of, you know, we're not street fighters. We can't, like, you know, Sudoku our way out of this. So we lawyer our way out of this. And this is what lawyers do, right? They accept the status quo as serious. And then I think that there is a lot of it that is, and I know we're going to talk about the media a little bit, but is just very captured by power and influence. And that's not to slag people who want, you know, their kids to get a clerkship too. But I think that there is a lot of, this is how power works and we work within it. And I think we see a lot of that happening. And so that, you know, blue ribbon commission that studied the court, I think that the presumption was we have to figure out a way to say that there can't be any structural changes. And lo and behold, they figured out a way to say it.
I have to admit that for this term, I have been like laser focused on only 3 cases. So number one, there is the Calais case, which is the case out of Louisiana that was argued last term, was re-argued again this term, and deals with essentially the fate of the Voting Rights Act and the ability to draw black opportunity districts in that case in Louisiana. Number two, I just argued a case in the Supreme Court, which was a campaign finance case. Obviously, since I argued it, I had to be laser focused on it. This deals with the coordinated party spending limits that the law has. And so I've been very focused on that. The third is a case that won't be heard until probably the spring out of Mississippi. That is also a voting case that my law firm and I are involved in. And this has to do with mail-in ballots. So we'll have plenty of time when we get closer to the spring to talk about that case. I keep hearing about, you know, various, like, seemingly an endless series of shadow docket, or maybe you'll tell me they're not shadow docket, maybe they're main docket cases that deal with executive power. I don't know if they're all grouped together or they're separate. I know there's the birthright citizenship case, which seems wacky because, like, I don't know how any just possibly adopt to the position. So I don't know if they took the case because they just wanted to put it to rest, or if you think there's something else going on there. And then beyond that, I don't even know what the hell they're hearing. So how do you explain to someone what the Supreme Court is doing this term? I'll be right back with more of our conversation in a moment. But, you know, I founded Democracy Docket in 2020 to cover the fight for voting rights happening in courtrooms around the country. And as Republicans amp up attacks on free and fair elections, it's more important than ever to get access to the news that matters to you and our democracy. For just $10 a month, you'll get access to exclusive events, insights from me, and much, much more. Become a premium member now by clicking on the link in the description below.
I don't want to suck up to the host too much, but I actually think the democracy cases in some sense are the flagship cases this term. So you're you know, sort of watching the right cases insofar as, you know, as you just noted, I think Calais is the whole shooting match. And I think that it's not an accident, Mark, that you just described, like 3 stations of the, you know, how we vote and who gets to vote and who funds voting, right? I mean, this is the John Roberts Reagan Justice Department project. And, you know, I flicked at it in the beginning, constricting the vote. And you've just named 3 flavors of doing away with campaign finance protections, you know, doing away with the way we think about whatever's left of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and the way we go to the voting booth. So in some sense, this is a transformational year for what's left of the whole notion of, you know, a free and fair election. And one more turn on that I've been thinking about a lot in the last couple of weeks is that the Roberts Court really is focused on voting in a year that is going to determine the outcome, not just of the midterms, but the next election, right? Like, this is the Roberts Court doing exactly the thing I sort of tried to start with, which is determining outcomes of elections in ways that suppress majority will through artifice. Each of these is through artifice. So I think it's not an accident that this coming term, this kind of 2025 term, will be dispositive on whether free and fair elections, or what's left of the guardrails of free and fair elections, continue. Look, I mean, it's absolutely true, you know, transgender athletes. I think birthright citizenship is probably the most important case this year, because it is bonkers in every area of serious scholarship and thinking. A year ago, that when the court banned this question of district court judges to issue nationwide injunctions, that was already a bridge too far that we were even hearing that case in the sort of panoply mark of the anti-immigration universe that we are now living in, is the court blessing an idea that is enshrined in the Reconstruction Amendment, reinforced by statute. Court decision, this is not a closed case. The fact that this is even at the court is unconscionable. But I think, you know, you and I are speaking in the same week that we're talking about denaturalization, you know, stripping citizenship from foreign-born citizens. Like, we are in a where I think the court is going to be the arbiter of whether Donald Trump gets to decide who an American is. And, like, if that doesn't scare your face off, it should. So, you know, transgender athletes, like, there's a whole bunch of cases that are important, but I do think the democracy cases are going to be the one that leave a thumbprint on it. And then the only thing, because you asked about the sort of Humphreys executor and the, you know, cases about independent agencies and removals, I would just say this. I think that the story we are telling wrong about the Supreme Court is that we continue to watch the merits docket and not the shadow docket. And the real story, 2 years ago, I would have told you the real story is the corruption and the quid pro quos and like Harlan Crow and the fishing trips to Alaska and San Melito, right? That what we're watching, this choreographed performance of, you know, these are the 70 merits cases we're hearing this year, and we're missing all the good stuff about what the Koch, you know, brothers bought and paid for. Now I would say, in addition to that story of Leonard Leo and who's in charge of the court and, you know, the unseen influences that, by the way, we in the press didn't cover. You know, we didn't cover that corruption docket at all. Now I think there is a second valence that's almost more important, and that is the stuff happening on the shadow docket. That is these day after day unsigned one paragraph orders that are on cases where you have meticulous findings of fact in the district courts, hundreds of pages of decisions and fact finding, and district court judges doing their best to issue these emergency decisions in the court with the stroke of the pen, except it's not even a stroke of the pen because it's written in invisible ink, right? Like, we don't know what the vote was, we don't know what the logic was. So I'm trying to urge people that if you are watching the sort of staged operatic, what is happening in front of that red curtain in those merits cases, you are missing the stuff that is dropping on Friday night when the court is, as they are in some of these cases, reversing a century of precedent without explaining why, and saying, oh, when we say we're reversing Humphrey's executor, but we're hiving off the Fed because the Fed chair can't be removed because we all have a lot of money invested. Like, it's crazy. They have one job, which is to show their work. And the question you're asking me is about what are we going to see those last 2 weeks in June when they show their work?
That's right. That is what I was asking.
And what I want to really say is, like, that's a framing that is like a super, like, it was valid until it wasn't. And I think now the framing is watch what pops out at 10 o'clock on Friday night. Right? Watch what pops out in an unsigned order. Watch what Justices Jackson and Kagan and Sotomayor are saying is happening on the shadow docket, and be very mindful of the fact that a court that is unable to produce reasoning or logic that is wiping away facts and saying, like, we're overturning precedent and not telling you why. And by the way, lower court judges are bound by that. They have to apply that as though it's the law. That's the story I want to tell this year. That the thing that we're not watching is being obscured by the stagecraft of, and now Justice, Barrett is on a book tour. Look at this, like, speech she's giving. We are being head faked into not looking at where the action is, and that's my answer to you is we're not going to know it because these come up in emergency postures, Mark, but this is the meat of what the court is now producing.
Yeah, I mean, the one example that I would offer, which my law firm was involved in, was the Texas redistricting case. So Texas redistricts, and they basically, for very complicated reasons that I won't bore people with, adopt a position in their redistricting that they are doing this because of race. They're using racial considerations to redraw their map. That has been the subject of so much discussion and controversy. There's a 3-judge panel appointed, and they move heaven and earth to do a 10-day preliminary injunction hearing. I mean, I at the time they were doing it, I said to everyone, they can call it a hearing, but 10 days is like a trial. And at the end of it, there is a very long opinion, written by a judge actually appointed by Donald Trump. And it strikes down the Texas map. I like to think I'm a realist and I'm not naive, but I was like, okay, this is subject to what we refer to as clear error review, right? Which means that the Supreme Court is not supposed to upend the factual findings of the trial court, because literally they heard testimony day after day, and the court's not going to find that gets reversed on the shadow docket without briefing, without certain for sure they couldn't possibly do that, and they did. What it feels like, honestly, Dahlia, is that because they did it that way, there's not the outrage. If they had done that in June, there'd be a big to-do about it. But no one really talks about it. No one really knows what to make of it. It wasn't fully considered. But the result is that Black and Latino voters in Texas are now going to be subjected to racially racist maps. And I don't know how to quite reconcile myself with that.
No, and I would add one more gloss to what you just said. If this happened in the last 2 weeks of June, when, all of cable news was focused on it and everybody was writing brilliant thumb-sucking think pieces, people would be outraged. But also, if the court had to explain that in a meaningful way, we would also be outraged. When the court just does this kind of oh, I'm at Caesar's Palace, here's a cocktail napkin, here's 2 sentences, lipstick kiss, best of luck, America. That's how the shadow docket operates. And so I think then you and I are in this incredible indefensible posture where we have to explain this thing came down in the middle of the night. We don't actually know who wrote it. We don't know who signed it. We don't quite know what the vote was. There's no meaningful applicable logic that other similarly situated judges apply. And then we have to do the thing that is their job, which is show their work. And then we have to do the additional thing, which is our act job, which is to say, this is why it matters. And so in a weird way, I don't know if I'm explaining this exactly right, but there's this burden shift because they give us no explanation. There's no answer. There's no roadmap for how this works next time. There's just, we have no ability as the Supreme Court to reject findings of facts. We're going to invent new facts, right? That's the Kavanaugh stuff, right? That will also have a docket order, right? In a case that has massive implications now for how people are being stopped and searched. There's this bizarre, we have arrogated to ourselves the power to reverse, as you say, hundreds of pages of factual findings that are painstakingly collected in a trial. And then we don't even have to explain it. We're just going to say And then we're going to take the position that these aren't even really real cases because they're not coming down in the last 2 weeks of June, except, and this is really the case that more than any other reflects the problem, we're going to, in August, we get this concurring opinion in the NIH shadow docket case where a judge is scolded. Judge Young is scolded in a concurrence by Justice Gorsuch, signed off but with Justice Kavanaugh, scolded for not applying a different it's really important to say if we get too invested in the conventional court coverage, which is it's October, here's the curtain or the 10 cases that matter. The day before the court case comes up, we'll give you a preview. Then we're going to explain, the to's and fro's and tugs of war that happened in the theater of oral argument. In the last 2 weeks of June, we will tell you those cases. You have missed the entire erosion of democracy that happened in a series of unsigned orders late at night. And, there's a whole side argument about whether it should be called the shadow docket, right? Talk to Steve Vladeck. There's a whole side argument about, the court has always had an emergency docket, but can they really have this many quote unquote emergencies that are entirely a function of Donald Trump signing some incredibly insane executive order and then telling an administration to go ahead and execute it? And that now we're blowing up ships in the Caribbean. Now we're, putting men on flights to Seacott prison, and all of this stuff shows up at the court. And instead of saying, we're not taking your emergencies because this is bonkers, come go through the district court, go through the appeals court, brief this case and bring it to us, the court is like, tick, 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 Trump wins almost every time. So they're totally complicit, not just in the distraction, the deflection of pay no attention to what's happening behind the curtain, but they're also complicit in, I think, overwhelmingly putting a thumb on the scale for this administration. And you can compare it to how the court on the shadow docket treated Biden's, initiatives. But they're also complicit in trying to distract us from what they're really doing. And that's the point I want to really hit hard on, is that we have to be smarter than to be distracted.
At the risk of dragging us back to the question of executive power, let me ask you sort of a big framing question. Do you think Donald Trump will lose? Like, how far does executive power go this way? Like, is there anything? We know that the president gets absolute immunity. It appears that he can fire whoever he wants for any reason. There are no independent agencies with the potential. So I guess that's the limit of executive power. Like, does he get to engage in war without a declaration of war? Does he get to deploy troops whenever he wants? Like, do you think the court cabins him on anything this term?
Tariffs.
Or no?
It'll be tariffs. I mean, I think
tariffs.
That's
think, where they draw the line.
I mean, look, they, dude, baby needs new shoes. This is the same as the Fed, right? This is their own checkbooks. I mean, listen, tariffs, I think that didn't, go well for the administration, which is why Trump has been, panicking. And I should have added it to the list of that is a big deal of a case. And I think that, that is a place where it looks as though the court is not on board for the way it was done. Again, I think that this is a court that has now staked out a maximalist unitary executive, call it what you want to call it, a theory of presidential power for Trump. And you're right to say, we can pick off the exceptions, but I think that we have seen time and time and time again, particularly on the shadow docket, that this is a view of the president's emergency powers. This is a view of immigration powers. This is a view of national security powers that is almost unbounded. Again, I think it's going to be really interesting if and when, and I know you and I are this is the existential worry But if and when a Democrat takes the White House, we revert to the that's a non-justiciable political question, or that's all of the tricks that were used to circumscribe Biden's powers. I think we're gonna find out that this is only works for Republican presidents. I think that for me, the reason your initial framing is really helpful is that, in a sense, I think the court is thinking about not just maximalist executive powers, but this is a court, the one value it places over that is maximalist judicial power. And not, by the way, to every Article III judge. We've watched this court go after lower court judges, as I suggested, Judge Young getting attacked for not applying a shadow docket order. This is a court that is most interested, I think, in maximizing its own power. And that's the overarching theme, is that the court has given itself the ability to say, Trump has all these powers but no more, but who has the power to allocate the Trump president's powers? Us. And that is the real meaning, I think, of the immunity decision. And it's the real sort of unifying theory of what the court is doing. It is systematically dismantling, the administrative state. It is systematically, dismantling agencies as we understand it. Congressional power is gone. It is giving power to the president, and in so doing, it is conferring unimaginable power upon itself.
Yeah, I think that's right. I had Professor Nicholas Bowie from Harvard on, and he made a very similar point that, and you don't oftentimes hear people defend Congress, but he was like, people want to know why Congress is not standing up for itself. Look at what the court has done to Congress. Like, every time Congress passes a law to try to, it said we want expert independent agencies. The Supreme Court's going to say we want campaign finance that regulates money in our own elections. The Supreme Court has said no. Like, that, in some sense, what was supposed to be the most powerful branch of government, Congress, has really been the victim of the court. And he says that this idea of judicial restraint is really about how they view states, not how they view Congress. That, like, the conservatives are more likely to give states power under federalism than they are to give Congress, and that has sort of distorted the constitutional system, because Congress has essentially wound up unable to do the stuff that when it tries to do, it
and that, I think, is such a nice tie-in to the conversation we had a minute ago about the ways in which the more the court gives itself power, the greater, theoretically, the obligation to explain why, right? Because it has one, in return for all that power, it has one obligation, which is to give us reasoned, principled arguments that we can apply as lawyers in future, and on which, state governments and legislators can rely to say, okay, we get it. These are the new rules for campaign finance. We get it. This is the new rule, right? You're saying, Section 4 is inoperative, but Section 2 is still a thing. We get it. We'll use Section 2. And when the court doesn't explain, when they don't give us a framework to go forward, what they're saying is, now we're just in this weird influence racket, right? This is like the mob. It's just like, we'll let you know when what you're doing is lawful. That's insane.
Towards that end, I have one particular bone to pick with the court that I want to ask you about. So in Shelby County, and you mentioned this, so that's why I'm bringing it up. In Shelby County, the Supreme Court promised us that, yes, it was striking down Section 5, which had put certain states with histories of discrimination under special requirements. So striking that down because it wasn't fair to pick on some states and not others, essentially. But that we shouldn't worry. People like me, people like you, voters, black voters, brown voters, shouldn't worry because Section 2 still had nationwide application. Okay? And now here we are just a few years later, and we're looking at potentially the demise of Section 2. In the case I just argued before the Supreme Court, Congress had initially put in place a restriction on the total amount of money that individuals could give to all candidates and parties. So in addition to the amount of money you could give to an individual, there was like an overall, what was called an aggregate limit on how much a person could give to all candidates. And a few years ago, in a case called McCutcheon versus FEC, that got struck down. And part of the reason why that got struck down is they said, well, we don't need it because there's still on parties people will give all of this money to all of these different people aggregated and just all go to the candidate because there's this on that. And as we were sitting in the oral argument, like it came up in the argument, it's like, wait a second, you said this other opinion that the reason why that law was because of this law that now like everybody is treating as if it's just like its own thing, like but you wouldn't have ruled the other way in that case, maybe. And so have you noticed this in other areas where the court seems to, I don't want to say it's a bait and switch, but it's like there's one explanation to do one thing and then that thing comes up and then they're ready to do away with that thing.
Right. No, it happens all the time. I mean, while you were talking, I was thinking of disclosure, right? Like, it's okay because we're going to force everyone to disclose. And so it doesn't matter that we get rid of all these regulations because then we're going to have all this, like, free-flowing disclosure and we'll know where the money's coming from. And then boom, 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 all disclosure is like a violation of my privacy and blah, blah, right? So we see this again and again and again. And it is part of the sort of systemic moving of goalposts. And I think bait and switch is the right word, which is, we're going to give you this thing in lieu of the thing we're taking away. Oh, and we're taking away that thing too. And we see that a lot. And I think, if I have a knock on the way we cover the Supreme Court, and I'm not a person who loves to sort of trash the press because I know we're all doing the best I can. I'm sorry, that was an amazing Freudian slip. We are doing the best we can. I think that we cover cases as though, I used the word operatic before, as though it's like this jack in the box, it appears, we explain it, and then we move on. And I wish that we could cover them sort of longitudinally over time, because I think that that's where you see, right? Like 5 years later, same case. 5 years later, after that, same case. And we don't have a beat that covers jurisprudence sort of through time as opposed to in the moment. And so I just think that there's a whole lot of places where the court, makes a promise and then a few years after, I mean, maybe, the best example I'm just thinking of right now is affirmative action, right? And the idea that it's okay, we're gonna, revisit this in X number of years, and then, and then here's Brett Kavanaugh comes along and is like, oh, okay, time has run out, we're almost there. So I think that there is this ongoing kind of etch-a-sketch quality where you start again. And I think the American public isn't well enough sort of in conversation with how doctrine unfolds, not in the moment, but over time, to say, but you just told us that. I think it's a fear of years ago and what promise was made. That be right now.
So you mentioned the media, and I do want to, before I let you go, ask you a few questions about. So you are